So welcome to our very first MindMap. I decided to kick off with Comply or Explain because I think it's so important to the way that we consider governance within the United Kingdom. So the areas that I'm going to cover are firstly, how does Comply or Explain work? A bit of background where it's come from and actually how it's spread around the world. Obviously looking at the benefits and the challenges of Comply or Explain. Thinking about the changes to the UK governance code that came in very recently. And lastly, just reflecting on what Comply or Explain means for the board or internal audit. In terms of how it works, three areas come to mind for me. Comply or Explain is very much about a balance of regulation, and it's a mechanism whereby the board of directors discloses how it complies with a regulation or an expectation, and if it's not compliant, the reasons for this. That could include alternative ways of operating. The key principle here is the board being accountable to its stakeholders and, especially for listed companies, accountable to its shareholders. I wanted to quickly think about the background to Comply or Explain, which has been really core to UK governance since the Cadbury Report in 1992, and it's become part of the way that listed companies are regulated. So it's an integral part now of the Financial Reporting Council's UK Governance Code, which applies to companies with a premium listing. What I think will be interesting is the outcomes of the weights review due at the end of 2018. It sets out 6 principles for large private companies and it uses an apply or explain approach. So watch this space. Beyond the UK, Comply or Explain is used in governance frameworks in over 70 countries, although some countries use apply or explain rather than the comply or explain that we're focusing on here. So now to the really interesting stuff, the pros and cons of Comply or Explain. Starting with the positives. When it works, Comply or Explain allows companies to be flexible while still operating within a regulatory framework for governance. It recognises that one size does not fit all, and therefore it should allow innovation and provide a route for companies to explain all of this without focusing on solely ticking a regulatory box. In my mind map, I initially came up with more cons than pros to Comply or Explain, and I think that reflects that there are probably challenges from the perspective both of boards as well as the shareholders of the company. For example, while the framework allows a business to be innovative, the institutional investors have appetite for explanations rather than compliance with the governance code. And the last point that came to mind for me regarding pros and cons was the potential for Comply or Explain to reduce the level or need for regulation. But I think I'll leave that to you to decide if that's a good or a bad thing. The contents of the whole UK Corporate Governance Code are a separate mind map, but as it was updated relatively recently, just a couple of months ago, I'm reminding myself here of some of the changes introduced to the code in summer 2018. So last but not least, what does this mean for the board, and indeed, what should internal audit be thinking about in this area as well? As well as the business complying or explaining, I think this is about balance and making informed decisions and public disclosures. It really should not be a surprise at year end what is put into the annual report or the director's statements. So that's my very first video mind map. If you have ideas for future mind maps, please get in touch.